I stood in a courtroom while my own parents looked at me like I was a stranger, and then accused me of stealing from the man who raised me. After my grandfather died, the only person who ever chose me, they sued me for his entire inheritance. They told the judge I manipulated him. That I isolated him. That I waited for him to die. They had the money. They had the media. They had the better lawyers. All I had was the truth, and the patience he taught me. Everyone thought I was too young. Too quiet. Too easy to break. They didn't realize I was listening. Watching. Waiting. If you've ever been abandoned, underestimated, or blamed for surviving, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end, because the moment the judge recognized who I was, everything changed. Like this video if you believe truth still matters. Comment if you've ever had to fight quietly. Subscribe, because some stories don't just entertain, they remind you you're not alone. My grandfather, Henry Sterling, used to say that truth doesn't raise its voice, it waits to be recognized. I grew up believing that, because he was the only one who stayed. When I was 5 years old, my parents left with cameras, contracts, and promises they never kept. They called it temporary. Henry called it abandonment. He never said it out loud in front of me, but he didn't have to. He simply took my hand and never let go again. I was raised in quiet rooms filled with books, not headlines. While the world knew Henry Sterling as a billionaire and founder of an empire, I knew him as the man who made tea every night and asked me what I thought was right, not what was convenient. He taught me how to read people before numbers, intentions before words. Money reveals character, he'd say. It doesn't create it. By 27, I wasn't naive, I was prepared. Not spoiled. Not entitled. Prepared. I worked inside the foundation he built, far from the spotlight my parents craved. I avoided interviews. I avoided drama. I believed dignity didn't need witnesses. When Henry died, the world mourned a legend. I mourned my father. The only one who ever showed up. I stood at his funeral in black, silent, composed, holding grief the way he taught me, privately, precisely. I thought the hardest part was over. I didn't know that his death would be treated as an invitation. And I didn't yet understand who would come knocking first, and what they were willing to say about me to take what he left behind. My parents, Richard and Evelyn Sterling, didn't walk back into my life with apologies. They returned with attorneys, cameras, and rehearsed concern. To the public, they were icons, philanthropists, panel guests, faces people trusted. To me, they were memories that stopped at age 5. In court filings, they called themselves grieving children. They said they had been kept away off from their father. That I had positioned myself as his gatekeeper. That I was cold, calculated, and dangerously persuasive. Reading those words felt like watching strangers rewrite my childhood with confidence. They spoke about power as if I had wielded it. As if a child abandoned for ambition could somehow grow up to control a man known for his will and clarity. They underestimated him. And they underestimated me. My mother cried on cue. Perfect pauses. Perfect tremble in her voice. My father spoke calmly about concern and family unity, as if he hadn't chosen distance decades ago. They framed absence as sacrifice. Neglect as necessity. The imbalance was obvious. They had influence, money, and public sympathy. I had silence, and a reputation built quietly, outside the spotlight. In that room, I could feel the scales tilting before I even spoke. I realized then this wasn't about inheritance. It was about image. About reclaiming relevance. About proving they still mattered more than the granddaughter who stayed. They weren't here to grieve Henry Sterling. They were here to erase me from his story. And as I sat there, hands folded, heart steady, one question pressed into my chest. How far were they willing to go to make the world believe their version of me? The first injustice didn't arrive as an attack. It arrived disguised as concern. During a preliminary hearing, my mother leaned forward and told the court she had worried for years about my grandfather's mental state. She said I had taken over his schedule, that I filtered his calls, that I decided who was allowed to see him. She spoke softly, as if every word hurt her to say. No one objected at first. That was the part that stunned me. Lies don't need volume when they're framed as love. My father added details, small, deliberate ones. He said Henry had grown confused toward the end. That he'd become dependent. That decisions were made for him, not by him. They never said my name directly. They didn't have to. Everyone knew who they meant. I sat there and said nothing. Not because I couldn't speak, but because interrupting would have given their story resistance, and resistance makes lies look important. I let them talk. I watched the judge's pen move slowly across the page. What unsettled me most wasn't the accusation. It was how easily the room accepted the possibility. How quickly a young woman's devotion could be rebranded as control. How silence was mistaken for guilt. Outside the courtroom, reporters asked if I felt responsible for my grandfather's isolation. I didn't answer. I smiled politely and walked past them. That was the moment I understood the shape of the fight ahead. They weren't trying to prove the truth. They were trying to plant doubt. And doubt, once it takes root, doesn't need evidence to grow. The first time I felt truly humiliated was not in court, but on the courthouse steps. Cameras lined the sidewalk, lenses waiting. My mother paused deliberately before answering a reporter's question, hand pressed to her chest, eyes filling with tears she'd practiced. She said she was heartbroken, not just by the loss of her father, but by what my daughter had become. That sentence followed me everywhere. Clips of her crying aired on every channel. Commentators speculated about my motives. Strangers online called me manipulative, cold, predatory. They dissected my silence like it was evidence. Every headline used my age, my inheritance, my proximity to power as proof of something sinister. Inside the courtroom, she cried again. Softer this time. More fragile. She spoke about motherhood, about regret, about wanting reconciliation before it was too late. The room leaned toward her pain. No one asked why reconciliation hadn't mattered when I was 5. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I felt my grandfather's lessons settle into my spine. Truth doesn't rush. It waits to be seen. Still, I felt the sting. Being publicly rewritten by the people who left me behind was a kind of violence I hadn't prepared for. They were turning my grief into spectacle, and using it to make me look inhuman. As the judge called a recess, I felt the weight of eyes on my back. And I knew this was only the beginning. By the time the trial truly began, I had already lost things I couldn't get back. Invitations stopped arriving. People I had known for years suddenly spoke to me carefully, like I might break, or worse, like I might be dangerous. Board members resigned quietly. Donors paused their support. No one accused me directly. They didn't have to. Suspicion had done the work for them. My name became conditional. I watched my grandfather's legacy, the one I had protected without ever asking for credit, turn into a question mark. Everything he built on clarity and ethics was now being discussed with raised eyebrows. And all because his granddaughter had stayed. What hurt most wasn't the money or the reputation. It was the way my parents spoke about care as if it were a crime. As if love, when given consistently, must hide an agenda. They took the purest part of my life and put it on trial. At night, alone in the house Henry left me, I walked through rooms filled with memories no court could admit as evidence. His chair by the window. His handwriting on the margins of books. Proof of a life lived consciously. Truthfully. I cried exactly once. Quietly. Then I stopped. Because I understood something crucial, they were trying to exhaust me before the truth ever arrived. And if I let them succeed, there would be nothing left to defend when it finally mattered. After that, I disappeared on purpose. Not physically, but emotionally, publicly. I stopped responding to commentary. I stopped correcting false narratives. I let my attorneys speak while I became almost invisible. To the outside world, it looked like I was retreating. Like the pressure had finally broken me. In reality, I was conserving energy. Grief hit differently when no one was watching. Some mornings I couldn't leave the house Henry built for us. I sat at his desk, touching the worn edge where his hand always rested, and wondered how love could be twisted so publicly into something ugly. I felt isolated, not because I lacked allies, but because noise drowns out truth, and silence is lonely. My parents mistook that silence for weakness. Their filings grew bolder. Their interviews sharper. They spoke as if victory was inevitable. And maybe, from the outside, it looked that way. They had momentum. Sympathy. Volume. I let them have it. Because what they didn't understand was this: silence wasn't surrender. It was discipline. Every instinct in me wanted to respond, to correct, to expose, but reacting would have given them control over the pace. Over the story. Henry taught me better than that. So I waited. I listened. I absorbed every claim they made and every assumption they relied on. I let the court, and the world, believe I had nothing left to say. But inside, a decision was forming. And once it was made, there would be no turning back. The choice came one evening, alone in Henry's study, surrounded by the quiet evidence of who he really was. I realized that if I fought my parents as parents, I would lose. Blood carries expectations. Guilt. Emotional traps. That was exactly what they were counting on. So I stopped seeing them as family. I began seeing them as opponents. That shift changed everything. I stopped reacting to what hurt and started preparing for what would matter. I met with my attorney and told him I didn't want aggressive posturing. I wanted precision. I wanted timing. I wanted the truth to speak once, clearly, when it could no longer be ignored. We reviewed every allegation carefully. Not to refute them immediately, but to understand the story my parents were trying to sell. Where they exaggerated. Where they assumed the court would fill in gaps for them. Where they relied on emotion instead of proof. Most importantly, I chose not to use Henry's name lightly. I wouldn't turn him into a shield. I would let his own words speak when the moment was right. That restraint cost me. People urged me to defend myself publicly. To show anger. To cry. I refused. Because I knew something they didn't. This case wouldn't be decided by noise or bloodlines. It would be decided by character. And character, when documented patiently, is impossible to fake. From the outside, it looked like my parents were winning. Their attorneys dominated the room, confident, aggressive, relentless. Every motion they filed was framed as protection, every accusation wrapped in concern. They spoke as if the outcome was already decided, as if the court was merely a formality on the way to correcting a tragic mistake. I felt the weight of that narrative pressing in from all sides. Even people who supported me began to whisper contingency plans. What if the judge believed them? What if doubt was enough? What if love, when misunderstood, could really be rebranded as manipulation? My parents watched me closely. I could feel it. My mother's eyes searched my face for cracks, for tears, for anger. My father studied my posture, waiting for defiance. They wanted a reaction. Something human they could point to and say, "There. That's proof." I gave them nothing. Inside, though, the pressure was immense. I replayed every memory with Henry, wondering how strangers could reduce a lifetime of care to suspicion. I questioned whether silence still served me, or whether it was becoming a risk. But then I remembered why they were so confident. They believed truth was something you perform. They had no idea it could be documented. And as the hearing adjourned that day, with their lawyers smiling and reporters circling, one thought anchored me. They were winning the moment. But they had no idea what was waiting for them at the end. Once I accepted that they believed victory was inevitable, I stopped fearing their confidence and started analyzing it. Confidence, when unearned, is sloppy. My parents repeated the same phrases in every filing, every interview: undue influence, isolation, medical interference. They weren't adjusting their story. They were recycling it. That told me something important: they were relying on assumption, not evidence. I watched how my mother leaned into emotion whenever facts were requested. How my father deferred to attorneys instead of answering directly. I noticed which witnesses they avoided calling. Which timelines they blurred. They spoke in generalities because specifics would betray them. More revealing than anything was what they never mentioned: Henry's voice. Not his letters. Not his evaluations. Not his writing. They talked about him constantly, but never let him speak for himself. I understood why. If Henry spoke, their story would collapse. So I did nothing but watch. I let their overconfidence harden into habit. I let them believe I was overwhelmed, passive, unprepared. The quieter I became, the louder their assumptions grew. That was the psychological edge I needed. Because once people convince themselves they've already won, they stop protecting their blind spots. And my parents had no idea how many of theirs I was already mapping. I didn't confront them. I didn't post rebuttals or speak to reporters. Instead, I moved quietly, deliberately, like a shadow passing through their carefully constructed narrative. Every document Henry left behind became a tool: letters, diaries, evaluations, even notes scribbled in margins. I cataloged them meticulously, cross-referencing dates, facts, and signatures. I contacted witnesses Henry had trusted, his aides, doctors, and longtime advisors. Each conversation was careful, casual, unremarkable. They didn't know the full picture yet, and I wanted to keep it that way. Every testimony, every paper, every recording was quietly being collected to form an unassailable chain of truth. Meanwhile, my parents continued performing their version of reality: emotional, polished, rehearsed. They never noticed I was already several steps ahead, using patience as my weapon. The first move wasn't dramatic. It was invisible. Strategic. Measured. And once this groundwork was complete, nothing they said, no performance, no lie, would ever hold up. But for now, they had to keep thinking they were winning. Because the moment they realized otherwise, it would be too late. Weeks into gathering evidence, a close call nearly unraveled months of careful preparation. One of my parents' lawyers called my grandfather's longtime nurse, asking pointed questions about letters and meetings. The nurse, startled, almost revealed more than she should. My heart raced as I imagined every piece of my meticulous plan slipping through their fingers. I stayed calm. Smiled politely. I let them think I was passive, overwhelmed, maybe even beaten. Behind the scenes, I immediately revised my strategy, double-checking which witnesses were ready, which documents were airtight, which timelines needed reinforcement. It was terrifying. Every instinct screamed to confront, to correct, to act immediately. But Henry had taught me better. Patience wasn't passive. It was deliberate. That near miss reminded me, the world doesn't care about truth until it's undeniable. And any exposure before the right moment could turn the advantage back to them. I accepted the fear. I absorbed it. I turned it into focus. And in that quiet tension, I understood one truth clearly: the closer you are to losing, the more crucial your next move becomes. One misstep now could ruin everything. To protect the truth, I had to give up control over everything else. Invitations I wanted to attend were declined. Public appearances I longed for were skipped. Even small comforts, like spending hours with Henry's personal archives, had to be postponed. Every concession felt like a cut, but it was necessary. I let my parents believe they were gaining momentum. I allowed them to speak, to charm, to play the grieving, virtuous role in the court of public opinion. I let them think their lies had traction. Inside, I moved like a strategist in silence, organizing letters, verifying testimonies, aligning witnesses. Every document, every recorded memory, every handwritten note became a hidden weapon. It was lonely. It was painful. But I knew that to strike decisively, timing was everything. Impulse or emotion would ruin it. Giving up small victories now wasn't weakness, it was preparation. Because when the moment came to reveal the truth, there would be no gaps. And they would finally see that their apparent triumph was nothing more than a stage I had allowed them to occupy. The day of the hearing arrived, and every piece of the plan was in place. The courtroom was full, media, lawyers, and even distant relatives curious about the spectacle my parents had promised. My parents walked in, confident, polished, rehearsed. They expected admiration for their performance, the sympathy they had cultivated for months. I walked slowly behind them, calm, composed, every step measured. My attorney nodded, subtle, unspoken signal that everything was aligned. Witnesses had been prepped. Documents verified. Letters, diaries, medical evaluations, every proof of Henry's lucidity and intent was ready to speak louder than any act. As the proceedings began, my parents started their narrative, painting me as manipulative, cold, greedy. I listened quietly, letting them feel invincible, letting them miscalculate my silence for submission. Then, when the moment was right, my attorney began presenting the evidence: Henry's letters spanning a decade, evaluations confirming his lucidity, diary entries detailing exactly how they had abandoned me and why I alone embodied his values. Their eyes widened. Their confidence wavered. And in that precise silence before the judge spoke, I realized they had no idea what had been waiting for them all along. One moment remained, one final reveal that would end everything. When the judge read Henry's words aloud, the room shifted. Letters detailing my grandfather's clarity. Diary entries exposing my parents' obsession with image over family. Evaluations proving he understood every decision he made. Each piece dismantled the narrative they had built for months. My mother's carefully rehearsed composure faltered. She tried to recover, but her tears now seemed performative, desperate, hollow. My father's calm, polished demeanor cracked as he realized the documents left no room for interpretation. They had counted on emotion, on spectacle, but the truth didn't need theatrics. I sat quietly, hands folded, letting the evidence speak. Every whisper, every murmur, every surprised glance confirmed what I already knew: victory didn't belong to the loudest voices. The judge declared the case dismissed. No undue influence. No manipulation. Just greed exposed. He looked at me and said words Henry would have smiled at. Justice does not belong to blood. It belongs to truth. And in that instant, the weight of months of planning, patience, and restraint finally lifted. My parents had underestimated me. Their story had collapsed. Yet the most powerful part wasn't the win. It was the quiet, undeniable dignity of the truth standing alone. The courtroom emptied, leaving echoes of disbelief and relief. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, feeling the warmth as if Henry himself was there, smiling quietly. The inheritance was mine, not just the money, but the legacy of integrity, wisdom, and unwavering truth he had instilled in me. Every letter, every diary entry, every careful lesson he had given now felt like armor I could carry forward. Weeks later, my father called. Hesitation in his voice, unpracticed and raw. He had read Henry's diary, the unvarnished truth. He admitted the years of neglect, the obsession with image, the choices that had abandoned me. And for the first time, he asked for forgiveness. I didn't answer immediately. Forgiveness is a gift, not a demand. But I listened. I allowed myself to honor Henry's lesson: dignity does not mean animosity, and closure does not require surrender. I realized then that the real inheritance was never financial. It was the understanding that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by truth, by loyalty, and by those who choose to stay, even when it's inconvenient. I had been underestimated. I had been challenged, humiliated, and scrutinized. Yet, through patience, strategy, and unwavering belief in what was right, I reclaimed not only what was mine, but also my peace, my power, and the certainty that I would never need to compromise my principles to survive. And as I walked away, I felt Henry's presence in every step, a reminder that the strongest legacy is the one that cannot be taken, only lived. The inheritance of truth is priceless, and it belongs to those who honor it. If this story moved you, hit like to honor the power of patience, strategy, and truth. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated or betrayed, only to rise stronger in silence? Your story matters, and I want to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because some stories aren't just entertainment, they remind us that courage, integrity, and quiet strength can always triumph over greed and lies.